what you're worth. Now go out and get what you're worth.
I'm gonna show you how great I am.
Welcome to the Steel City. Is everybody ready to go? This will play the greatest radio show. Jim Stella and Johnny Parlay with the facts. So relax, grab a drink, then let's kick back.
Welcome back, fans, to The Spread. I am Jim Sella. I am sitting here again with Brandon Desantis. How you doing today, Brandon?
Doing really well, man. Thanks for asking.
Hey, no problem. Hey, we're going to sit and talk about this concussion controversy going on at Michigan. The Michigan Wolverines, they let their quarterback Shane Morris stay on the field for, I think it was one play last week after displaying obvious concussion symptoms. The sophomore stumbled and needed help from his teammates to get to his feet after a helmet-to-helmet hit knocked him to the ground. You've dealt with a lot of concussions, in your career. Why is it so important to follow concussion protocol and avoid that you just got your bell rung theory that everybody used to go by back in the day?
Well, Jim, let's start from the beginning. Concussions have really been around as long as sports have, especially football. It's recently become more of a hot button issue because of the advancements in research, recognition, evaluation, all that stuff. It's definitely one of the biggest areas being researched right now in sports medicine. I even did my graduate research on concussion-related issues. The most important concept that you mentioned, though, is changing the culture of head injuries. And this really starts with education. It's kind of an old school way of thinking to say, oh, he just got his bell rung, he's fine, he can play. This is, as we're finding out, very, very incorrect. So like I mentioned, we need to really be educating the public, and that starts with the athletes, the coaches, the staff members associated with the team, parents of the kids, if it's a younger football team, really everyone involved in sports. What most people don't understand is that a concussion it's a brain injury. We don't see the brain like you can see an ankle, you can see an elbow, so we don't see the injury, but it is occurring and it is damaged. The proper name of a concussion really is a mild traumatic brain injury, and if not handled properly, this can really predispose an athlete to what's called second impact syndrome. This is one of the reasons why concussion protocols have become so important. Second impact syndrome basically means that an athlete or a person suffers a concussion from an impact. They're either allowed to play or they continue whatever activity they're doing, and then they suffer a second impact to the brain when the first impact hasn't really fully healed. This can cause a rapid spike in swelling in the brain, and this can be life-threatening. People have died from this. So that's really the biggest threat with allowing an athlete to continue playing in a game with a concussion. It's some scary stuff. It's some scary stuff.
Well, what is exactly the eval process to diagnose a concussion? You can just, your foot hurts and you kind of shake it off. What does it look like out on a field to you, the difference between just a regular injury compared to a concussion?
Well, concussion evaluations start on the sideline. It's important first to kind of check off and make sure that it's not going to be an emergency situation. If somebody has a concussion, you need to evaluate their mental status. If that starts deteriorating, if you think there's a spinal injury, something starts worsening, then this can become an emergency issue that will need to be transported to the ER. So it's always important, first and foremost, to kind of evaluate the symptoms. You're checking how reactive they are, especially if an athlete loses consciousness. It's not really considered worse if an athlete goes unconscious because of a concussion, but it's another issue that needs to be evaluated, needs to be looked at. So first and foremost, it's kind of checking off and making sure that this is not going to become a life-threatening issue. Next is symptom evaluation. So a big part of the reason why the education is so important is because athletes have to report their symptoms. If athletes lie about it or say they're not having a headache when they are, that puts them in a dangerous position. Now, some athletes, don't want to come out of a game. It might mean losing their starting job, losing, if it's an NFL player, losing, money, all that kind of stuff. But really, without athletes being honest with their with their symptoms, we can't diagnose it properly. So things we're looking for symptoms, first and foremost, headache, any kind of pressure in the head, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, sensitivity to light, vision. The list goes on and on. There's a lot of different concussion evaluation forms that are being used. They're pretty standard, so symptom is one of the big checkoffs of that. We're also looking for their cognitive assessment. There's different tests, there's different tools we can use to assess this, as well as balance. These are all things we can check right on the sideline, and it only takes a matter of a couple minutes. This doesn't need to be done by a neurologist. It can be done by a team physician. It can be done by athletic trainers. Our profession, we're trained to handle these kind of things. So on the sideline, that's the big stuff you're going to hit. Obviously, a person, if anything pops up positive on that, we're removing them from play. We're taking them out, not allowing them to go back in, because again, we want to limit the chance for that life-threatening second impact syndrome.
Now, I seen that the Wolverines said that they're going to have a medical professional in the press box from now on to help communicate injury protocol to all necessary parties. Do you think that bird's eye view will help? Would you really even be able to see all the players on the field from so high and notice the concussion symptoms?
Having an extra set of eyes is always going to be important no matter what the injury is. So I think that's a great idea. On the sidelines, you can see the whole field, but depending on where you're standing, I mean, if a play goes down to the corner, I mean, I'm a normal sized guy, I'm 5'10", but there's athletes on my team alone are 6'5", 6'6", 6'7". They're wearing huge pads. At all times I can't see everything at every single moment. So it would always be helpful to have an extra set of eyes there to help look for these kind of things.
Now, I know, when I was a kid, I'd wreck my bike or, just get hurt playing and I hit my head and my mom would always be yelling, "Don't fall asleep, Jimmy." Is that still the standard for concussions? Because I've heard that it's actually not that bad to go to sleep now if you think you have a concussion.
No, that's kind of, again, it's a very old school way of handling things. Research has shown that going to sleep is actually going to help a person with a concussion. It's not like we want them, sleeping for days on end, but if someone is diagnosed with a concussion, they are not participating in any kind of sport activity. If they're a college player, this means they're not practicing, they're not lifting, they're not conditioning, and if they're still symptomatic, they're probably not going to meetings. So the biggest component for what we're doing to handle a concussion is pure rest. That might mean, not focusing on your phone for hours on end, not playing on the computer, playing video games, watching TV. Pure rest is kind of the best way to handle these things right off the bat to get those symptoms to calm down. So going to sleep is perfectly fine. They're not going to slip into a coma. But again, we're sending these athletes home with signs to look for. If an athlete goes home and their headache starts getting very, very intense, or they start developing nausea, vomiting, this kind of stuff, these are signs that the head injury could be worsening, and unfortunately in that situation, they probably need to go to the emergency room.
Now, you mentioned earlier with second concussion syndrome, you might actually die out on the field if it's bad enough. What are the other dangers of playing with a concussion, and, is it really that much of a risk that you could possibly die out on the field?
Yeah, definitely. And unfortunately, in some situations, turn on the news, you can see there's always a high school kid who's having some sort of, long-term brain injury, or unfortunately, we've seen deaths in the media. So it is a real risk. We don't grade concussions anymore. There's not like, oh, he has a grade 1 concussion or a grade 3 concussion. We're doing a better job of just, treating them all the same. If you have a concussion, it's a concussion. It's an end-all, be-all. We're not really grading them, so it's not like, oh, if he just has a grade 1 concussion, he can go back in the game. No, any concussion signs, they are out.
Well, Michigan admitted that they made many, many mistakes and that there was a serious lack of communication when dealing with this. I kind of feel that, the extra set of eyes and better communication is probably the best method to try to help all the trainers and all the doctors diagnose these concussions. Because, going back to what you said a little bit ago, you're only 5'10", you're around all these monster athletes. So it just, to me, it feels like the biggest obstacle is actually, being trained to know what the symptoms are and then actually being able to see these symptoms. Because I'm 6'3" and I can't see around all those big ass dudes.
Yeah, I mean, anytime we can have more help down there, that would always be awesome. Unfortunately, some smaller schools, they can't afford that. It might be mandated by the Big Ten. I'm not really 100% sure of the rules of the Big Ten. I haven't worked in that conference. If that's mandated by the Big Ten that they have to have an individual there, that's awesome. But smaller schools, high schools, they're not going to have access to that. That's an extra salary or just an extra person helping out. So it's really important for everyone working with the team to be trained in these issues. And if you have an athletic trainer at a school, they're going to be able to handle it. We do it, unfortunately, all the time, and we're trained in it. And again, we're really focusing on the evaluation process and then the return to play process. So I'll get into that a little bit. Basically, after an athlete suffers a concussion, any kind of head injury like that, they are going to be on full rest. Like we talked about before, no meetings, no lifting, and we're evaluating their symptoms every day. So they're coming in, checking in with us. We're tracking them, how they're feeling. Basically, they can't start any activity till they're symptomatic or non-symptomatic for 24 hours. So if a guy has a concussion on a Monday morning, he comes in Tuesday morning, no headache. Okay, that's great, but let's wait till it's been exactly 24 hours since you haven't had any issues at all. At that moment, it's not like, okay, their symptoms are gone, go back out and practice fully today. We do a graded return to play. This is mandated by the NFL, by the NCAA, pretty much anybody who's handling concussions. We use a graded return to play. What that means is once they are symptomatic for 24 hours, they can then do some sort of cardio test. Normally, we're going to throw them on a bike, an elliptical, just depending on the sport, anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. Get their heart rate going, create some blood flow, get them back to doing something active. And that's really it for the day. And again, we're monitoring that for the next 24 hours. If they're symptom-free, they can progress. If they're not, unfortunately, we have to wait another 24 hours before they can get back to whatever activity, whatever stage they're at in the return to play process. So usually the next step in the process is some sort of lift. We use a protocol. Guys are doing different kinds of lifts, whether standing, they're laying, they're sitting, they're moving around, basically putting the body in different positions and putting stress on it, with lifting. They're not doing 100% of their weight, but they're getting out there, they're doing something. Assuming that they're fine with that, 24 hours, they can participate in non-impact practice. So if they're a wide receiver, they're out, they can run some routes, they're back in pads, probably wearing some sort of red jersey so people know not to hit them. But they're getting back out with the team, getting back to their position, and going through everything non-impact. Continuing along with that, 24 hours later, they're feeling better. They're probably going to have some sort of check-in with the team physician, just to run through everything again, running through the symptoms, running through the cognitive testing, the balance testing. Assuming they're doing fine with that, they can then go back out and be introduced into contact activity. But you can see how each day we're monitoring it. Each day we're adding a little bit more, assuming that they can handle that. If they can't, then we have to kind of slow it down a little bit. But it's very important to just not allow an athlete to go right back in because, like we talked about before, you don't see the brain, but it's not fully healed. So you injure your ankle the next day. It doesn't hurt anymore, but is it fully healed? No, probably not. There's some swelling there. You might have some motion restrictions. It's the same way with the brain. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean that it's not injured and it's still healing. And we want to limit any kind of long-term issues or more serious issues that might occur by allowing an athlete to go back too early.
Now, aside from those rare cases of like complete paralyzation that you see on the field, in your opinion, do you think a concussion is the worst, most serious injury you can suffer in football?
Yes and no. I mean, anytime that you have a concussion related to some sort of spinal issue, that's what you're talking about, having paralysis. That's obviously a big deal as far as sports go, but obviously as far as life goes too. And and that's something that we never like to see. A concussion, if it's handled correctly and the athlete is upfront and honest about the symptoms that they're having, if it's handled correctly and they can return to play safely, then it's not necessarily the worst issue you can have if it's done correctly. The flip side of that is the people who then suffer repeated traumas to the head. Anytime you're messing with the brain, you're not just, we're treating these athletes right away. We're treating them, and the goal is to get them back to playing their sport. But what we also have to keep in mind is what these kids have to do with the rest of their life. Eventually they're gonna need to get a full-time job. They're gonna need to, have a family, or they're gonna be chasing kids around. And so we're focused on, preventing issues from occurring so they can participate in their sport, but also that they can have a normal, healthy life. So you always have to look at it a little bit closer and handle it on a case-by-case basis. For someone who's had repeated head traumas, their recovery is going to be a lot slower, and it just needs to be looked at a little bit closer to make sure that it is safe and that everything is going, everything is progressing along safely.
Well, again, Brandon, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Everybody always loves hearing from you. We all love learning about all these interesting medical things. I know I really like to learn about this stuff. It helps the fans understand the game. It helps the fans understand and relate to the players a little more, like you touched with their family life. A lot of people don't think about that. Outside of football, these guys have a family and have a life. They need their brain to function correctly. They can't be losing all their functioning at 50 years old. You're not an old man at 50 years old anymore. We live a long time. So I'm sure everybody enjoys the information and the entertainment.
Man, well, first of all, thanks for having me on again. Anytime I can promote concussion education, it's huge for my field. It's huge for the healthcare field in general. So thanks for having me on, and thanks for letting me talk about that.
Well, I want to thank everybody for listening today. You can follow us on Twitter at bet_the_spread. Check out our Facebook page, The Spread, our YouTube channel, The Spread. Basically, Google The Spread Jim Sella and check out every link that comes up. You will definitely be entertained. And thank you again, Brandon, for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll have you on again next week.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me. Have a good one.
Hey, you too.